Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. There have been tons of great defensive players in the history of the Chicago Bears. In the over 100-year history of the franchise, you've seen tons of legends play for the Monsters of the Midway on the defensive side of the ball. Guys like Dick Butkus, Mike Singletary, Brian Urlacher, and Dan Hampton are on-the-field legends and are some of the best to ever do it. And for many people, the top guy to ever don a Bears uniform on defense, or one of them at the very least, was Richard Dent. He's a four-time Pro Bowl defensive end. He was named a first-team All-Pro in 1985 after leading the league in sacks and anchoring maybe the most vaunted and feared defense of all time. And not only is he a Super Bowl MVP, but he is a Hall of Famer, forever enshrined in canon. Dent played 12 years in the Windy City, but what you might not know is that it was awfully close to being just 3 years. He was in such a contract dispute with the Bears that he threatened not to play at the Super Bowl, and it got so ugly at one point during the ensuing offseason that General Manager Jerry Vainisi flat out said, "I'm done with Dent." This is the story of the drama and the controversy surrounding Richard Dent and the Chicago Bears. Before I talk about the threat and boycott of the Super Bowl and the lengthy holdout that followed, we need some context as to how we got to this point. We need to understand why the tensions were so high to begin with. In 1983, the Bears spent their 8th round draft pick on the Tennessee State defensive end. The Bears had an amazing draft class that year. Jimbo Covert, their first pick, became a Hall of Fame tackle. Willie Gault was an electrifying receiver. Dave Dorison made 4 Pro Bowls, Tom Thayer started at right guard, and then with pick number 203, Richard Dent became a stud. Now, Dent didn't play a whole lot in 1983. However, after getting 3 sacks in the team's final 4 games, including 2 sacks in a 1913 victory against the Minnesota Vikings, Dent got a chance to start in 1984. Or so he thought. That's because even though he was listed as the team's starting right side defensive end, lining up next to Dan Hampton, defensive coordinator Buddy Ryan decided to demote Dent and start Tyrone Keys. Apparently the demotion was partly because of a bruised thigh, and partly because Dent was playing poorly against trap blocks. Dent rode the bench for the first 6 games, but after a relatively ineffective start to the season for Keys, Dent was reinserted into the starting lineup. And the rest is history. In 1984, despite only starting 10 games, Dent made up for lost time by finishing 3rd in the NFL with 17.5 sacks and receiving his 2nd-team All-Pro nomination. There was one 3-game stretch that he had that might be the most dominant stretch by a defensive end ever, where he had 3 sacks in a Week 8 victory against the Buccaneers, 2.5 sacks in a Week 9 victory against the Vikings, and an unbelievable 4.5 sacks in a Week 10 victory against the Raiders. 10 sacks in 3 games. If you include the postseason, where he had 3 sacks in a 23-19 victory against Washington in the NFC Divisional, Dent finished the 1984 campaign with over 20 sacks. It was an unbelievable total. When 1984 ended, it was clear that even though the sample size was somewhat limited, that Dent was one of the best defensive ends in all of football. And now, he wanted to be paid like one. Remember that Dent was drafted in the 8th round, meaning that he got an 8th round salary. The contract was a 3-year deal, where he got $60,000 in 1983, $70,000 in 1984, and $90,000 in 1985. Not only was he drafted low, but you have to remember that the 8th round was kind of a crapshoot. 25% of the 8th round picks from that draft class never even played it down in the NFL. Dent didn't have any complaints about the contract at the time, since it was pretty standard all things considered. However, that was before he went on a tear and surpassed everyone's expectations. And the fact that he was only going to be making $90,000 in 1985, coming off of a year where he had over 20 sacks and was named a Pro Bowler and a 2nd-team All-Pro, was insulting. The average NFL salary in 1985 was $190,000. Dent, one of the top defenders in the league in 1984, was not even making half of that. And with that in mind, he decided to hold out. Unfortunately for him, the holdout didn't go too well, as he reported to camp in August without a new deal. General Manager Jerry Vainisi had no desire to renegotiate his contract, as Dent only started 10 games, hadn't been around long enough, and might have just had a fluke of a year. As Vainisi said, "I've recommended that he play this season, and then we would have a better barometer for pegging Richard's value. He hasn't established a consistent track record." Dent was playing the 1985 season on just $90,000, hoping to prove that the 1984 season was not a fluke. You all know what happens next. The 85 Bears might be the greatest defense ever assembled, and anchoring that was Richard Dent, who played out of his mind. He led the league with 17 sacks. He was named a first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. Not only did he lead the league in sacks, but he led the league in forced fumbles as well with 7. In 11 of the team's 16 games, he was credited with at least half a sack. And then when the postseason came, he showed no signs of slowing down, guiding the Bears to their first Super Bowl appearance in franchise history and posting 4.5 sacks over those first 2 games. By this point, it was clear that this was not a fluke. Richard Dent was that good. But Dent still did not receive any extension. He was still on that $90,000 contract. And when the Bears made it to Super Bowl 20, Dent made his position very clear to the team and to the front office. The message was simple: renegotiate my contract and pay me what I'm worth, or I'm not playing in the big game. Now obviously, as you guys know, he played in the Super Bowl since he was named the MVP. So did the Bears cave in and give him a new deal? Not quite. Part of it was just a giant bluff by Dent, who said I couldn't pass up this opportunity. Who knows when I could play in this game again? However, there was legitimate talk by Dent's agent leading up to the game, saying that he wasn't guaranteeing that Dent would play in the Super Bowl without a new contract. The crisis was put on the back burner for the game, but after Super Bowl 20, and as we headed into the 1986 offseason, the tensions between the sides were at an all-time high. Chicago was willing to give him a new contract, but Dent felt like the number was way below what he was actually worth. Consider this: New York Jets defensive end Mark Gastineau was widely regarded as the best defensive end in the league. He had 19 sacks in 1983 and 22 sacks in 1984, both of which led the NFL, and made it to 5 straight Pro Bowls from 1981 to 85. He was making somewhere in the ballpark of $800,000 per year. The Bears gave Dent a 3-year deal worth $1.3 million, or just over $400,000 per year. In the eyes of Dent, this was insulting. He said, if I'm the best, then I want to be paid like it. And so began a lengthy holdout, where even though the Bears eventually raised their offer to $1.7 million, or roughly $600,000 a year, Dent was not budging. By this point, Chicago was getting frustrated. After that $1.7 million offer was declined, General Manager Jerry Vainisi said, "We've gone as far as we're going to go." He then added, "I'm done with Dent. I told Mike Ditka the other day that it looks like Tyrone Keys is in for a big year." Even Dent's agent, Everett Glenn, said that it was looking unlikely that Dent would ever play for the Bears again. The standoff was real. To give you an idea of how bad it got, at one point, Vainisi said, "I'll do everything possible to sign him for next year, but I thought I already had." He even went as far as calling Dent's agent unreasonable. And Dent compared what the Bears and the NFL were doing to slavery, and flat out said, "If the Bears don't want me, I'll just play someplace else." Dent continued his holdout and skipped team minicamp. It was truly looking like the end of the road for Dent in Chicago. However, at the end of July, somehow, the two sides finally got a deal done. Unfortunately, the terms of the contract were undisclosed, but considering the fact that he signed a new deal 3 years later with the Bears in 1989 with over $1 million per year, you can get a rough idea of how much he signed with during this 1986 offseason. Dent played in Chicago all the way until the 1993 season, starting 147 games and racking up 124.5 sacks. And when most people think of Dent's time in Chicago, the ugly standoff in 1986 is probably not even close to the first thing that comes to mind. But it's crazy how close we came to seeing Dent play the bulk of his NFL career in a completely different uniform. From threatening to sit out the Super Bowl and looking like he was never going to play for Chicago again, to becoming nothing short of a Bears legend. Be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JerryGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.